Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter, here flying solo for this live stream on this rainy Friday. At least it's rainy here in Maine. If you could do me a favor, if you are watching live, if you could type in the chat that you could kind of see my little crystal paintings here and hear me, that would be fantastic. That way I know that that everything is broadcasting just fine. Looks like it's okay on my end, but I just want to make sure that everybody else is getting all of this too. So today we are going to paint some crystals and gemstones, and I'm seeing that people are hearing me and seeing this, so this is good. And I thought this would be a really great fun project for a rainy day, and it would also be a great introductory for watercolor for anybody that maybe has been a little nervous about trying it, because we're going to be using bright primary colors. You could even use your children's watercolors. You could use your re-inkers. If you're a stamper, you could scribble your markers onto a dish and use that as a palette if you wanted to. I just thought it would be a lot of fun. So I was inspired by this little picture that I did earlier this week. I was just playing with some samples that actually my friend Rich, the spin doctor on YouTube, had sent me. And I really like the way this came out. I shared it on Instagram, and several people asked if I would do a tutorial on this. So I thought that would just be a perfect live Friday. The paints that I'm personally using, and again, use whatever you have, are the White Knight or Yarka watercolors from Russia. And I have linked the supplies I'm using in the video description, and those links will go to jerry'sdiorama.com. They are our sponsor this week, and they also have a coupon code in there for free shipping and 20% off, I do believe. So make sure you go grab that coupon. There are some exclusions, but you know, check it out. Use it if you're going to do some shopping, and that will save you a little bit of money. And I think that's pretty much it. So we're going to begin by sketching, and I'm just using a mechanical pencil because that's what I like to use. And I'm just working on this, like, it's about 7 by 10, I'd say, piece of cardstock, maybe 6 by 9, somewhere in that ballpark. And I'm going to start by giving my crystals a base. And I am just going to kind of make almost like kind of like a boat. I'm going to draw a little bit darker than I want you to, just because I want to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. But I want kind of a rough bottom, because a lot of times those crystals and gemstones, they're kind of found inside of rocks. And so like they have this kind of crust on the bottom. And so I want to get that kind of rough texture. And it's going to be nice because it will be a cool contrast from the smooth gems that we get up above. And this kind of crust can be a little thick, and I'm going to put the top part of this crust in here. And this will be, we're going to actually do this with salt. I didn't do that on that example there, but I kind of had the idea to do that afterwards. And that would be kind of like the just forming kind of whiter crystals. Now, I don't think you're going to find rainbow crystals like this in real life, but I thought it was pretty. And I kept looking at pictures of different crystals yesterday, and I kept seeing like people would say that they were for this or for that, like they had like medicinal properties. And I just thought, how cool is that? How fun would it be just to do like a painting with all these different kinds of crystals? Maybe it would be, you know, it'd just be kind of fun. And that's kind of why I decided to do it. So now I'm doing a combination of different shapes here. I'm doing some jagged, more organic shapes. I'm doing some taller, angular shapes. Hopefully that's dark enough. I'm going to keep moving my hand out of the way so that you can see what I'm doing here. Don't try to make everything too perfect, because then it won't look very realistic. And when in doubt, just kind of make a shape and then draw some straight lines down to connect it to the base of the crystals. I just want to have enough room here so that when I paint across, I'm going to have room to kind of get my rainbow in, because that's what I really want to achieve here. I probably am going to miss questions as we're going, but the moderators can help you. What I'll end up doing is take questions when I'm drawing my my artwork, and that way I'll be able to answer you and watch the chat at that time. So please be patient. I will also stick around at the end of the broadcast to do some Q&A, and that will be really handy too for the people watching the replay, because the tutorial portion will go a little bit smoother. So again, just trying to make some interesting shapes. Try not to make it too perfect. You can have little kind of small crystals kind of clinging onto the edge. There's so many different cool shapes, and if you like a particular type of stone, maybe it's ruby or emerald or amethyst, you can go online and you can Google that particular stone, and you can get a great reference photo so that you can paint exactly what you want to paint too. So don't feel like you have to do what I'm doing here. And you can also make this fit whatever size paper you're wanting to paint it on. And we can add to it if we want to as we go along. Okay, so now we're going to wet the area that we painted. So I'm just using my number 8 round because this isn't a very large piece of paper. And I am just going to try it wet within the shapes. If you're not sure if you're going, you know, how far your brush is going out, it's better to like leave a little bit of gap between your pencil line and the water. So when you go in with a paint, you can bring the paint right to the edge and let it kind of wick in. And I will be taking questions pretty soon because after we put our colors in, I'll need to dry this. I just knocked my heat tool off my table a few minutes ago and I tested it. It still worked, so that's good. And you can use whatever colors you like, but I will go over the colors I'm using as we get to them. I'm using my Yarka palette. I'm not as familiar with it, so I don't know if I'll know every color, proper name right off the top of my head, but I can definitely give you an equivalent. Some of them have different names because they're Russian and they've been translated. Okay, I'm just going to tip it to see if I've pretty much wet everything. Get any little spots that I missed. And you want it to be nice and shiny. So I'm going to start off with red, just like our rainbow. And this is kind of like a permanent rose here. I'm going to drop this up here towards the top. Now, if you like it one color more than others, you can use more of that color. Have that color be more dominant. That's fine. I'm actually going to go right into an orangey color. This is Cad Red Light. I love watching the colors kind of float and swirl. I want to work pretty quickly because I want the papers to still be wet so I can do the salt effect. Then go right into yellow. I'm going to go into a lemon yellow. I believe this is a cadmium yellow, a cadmium lemon, so it's not super transparent, but since it's so strong, such a strong pigment, and I have it so watery, it's going to be quite transparent. I'm going to add a little bit of that into my orange area. I'm going to grab some emerald green. I'll slide my palette down so you can see that beautiful color. It's really pretty when you mix that with the phthalo blue. You get this gorgeous turquoise aqua color. Add that a little bit in the yellow. There aren't too many yellow stones. There's citron. Now I'm going to go in with my phthalo blue. And last but not least, I'm going to grab some violet. And this is dioxazine violet. And again, we're going to be really watery. We're going to have a shift when this dries because we are working with it so watery. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of, I think this is a Van Dyke brown. Use a burnt umber, nothing too red. I'm going to mix that with my dioxazine violet, and I'm going to go along the bottom here and add that color in there. And this is going to give us that kind of crusty look. And then I'm going to grab some burnt sienna, raw sienna. And I'm just using raw sienna as opposed to yellow ochre because it's a little bit more transparent. And this is going to give us that kind of rocky crust. And now I'm going to carefully apply some salt. So when I want to control where my salt goes, I'm actually going to put this in my hand. And this is a coarse kosher salt, so it's going to give me some bigger flecks. And I just want to get that kind of where the crusty areas and the colors are meeting. So I'm hoping I have enough in the red area. And I am going to blot that puddle a little bit. I don't want to waste that salt, so I'm just going to top it. I'm just going to set it on the edge of my table in case I need some more later. And I'm just going to just get in there and blot that. You could blot it with a dry brush, but nothing's started to dry yet, so I think this is good. And we will be adding more layers of color. So I'm going to do a little bit of dabbing just for a little bit of texture too, because we can always add on more of that crust. All right, so now I'm going to dry this. So if you have a question, type the word question in all caps, and I will be looking at the chat while I dry this. It's so nice to see so many people in today. It didn't look like my things had gotten very popular on social media today, so I didn't know if anybody had actually seen my notifications or not. So if you have a question again, okay, we got one from Rose and Rose Art. Do you have any tips on controlling water flow when painting, because I seem to always have too much or too little? Honestly, I would draw some boxes on a scrap of paper, like the back of a painting that didn't come out so good. And I would just start practicing washes of different consistencies, some with a consistency of heavy cream, some with like a whole milk consistency, and some in a watery consistency. Somebody asked about the White Nights turquoise. That's a mixture of the emerald color and the phthalo blue color. I don't have it in my set, but that's what it's made out of in the White Nights line, I do believe. Heidi Lily wants to know if this can be done on the stamped image. Absolutely. Stampyro wants to see the paints. And how are Yarka paints in terms of liftability? They're about the same as any other paints. The Yarka paints come in whole pans, so it's twice as big as what you usually get from most sets at this price. So I think it's a great buy. Does any kind of salt work? Yes, treasures of many. Any type of salt will work for this. Kosher salt gives you a more dramatic effect because it has different size granules. Says question, you said your paper was cardstock today. How many pounds is it? Oh, it's not cardstock. I'm sorry if I said that. No, it was a scrap of watercolor paper, watercolor card. This is 140 pound. This sample here was done on 300 pounds, so it's almost like a cardboard. You can probably even see the thickness of it there. Yeah, definitely watercolor paper. Question, you mentioned 2 watercolor books that are great for basics. Can you say those again? One is Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Watercolor. And I also like the watercolor flower pocket palette, but that is out of print. Actually, I think they're both out of print now. All right, we're almost dry here. Gotta make sure that salt is good and dry or it will smear. Wow, such a busy chat. A question from Heidi Lily. Do any brands of watercolors work for this? Yes, Heidi, you can use whatever you want. Even Crayola's Prang would work great. Those are both kid brands. Even your kids might have them. They're fantastic. Okay. And one more question. What's the difference between phthalo blue 15:1 and 15:3? Slightly, one would be a little bit more green. They're just slightly different tones in those pigments. Oh, Baru Silva's son wants to say hello. Hello. Thank you very much for watching. Okay. So I'm using just a tissue to wipe off my salt, mostly because I might have some water on my hands just from handling my brush, and I don't want to smear my watercolor. You can hear the crunchy sound that it's making. I have to say this is a sample of Milford paper, actually. I did link Arches in the description because I know that's tried and true, and I always have good results with that. And I figured this is gonna work on no matter what I paint it on. So I just wanted to try that sample. Also sent to me from my friend Rich. They have different papers over in the UK. It's interesting to see how the other half lives. Okay, so I've got some really interesting textures in here. You may have a greater crystal effect depending on the paper you are using, but that looks pretty good. All right, so now we're going to work on our glazes of color. So this was a very quick sketch, and you'll see that, you know, as you put on darker streaks of color, you start to get that shiny look. I also have a gel pen here that I can use for my bright, shiny highlights. If you don't have a white gel pen, you can use like white acrylic paint even, anything like that. Or you could have applied masking fluid before you begin painting. Now, something I didn't use in that because it was too small, my other sample, is a flat brush. And I thought, you know, since a flat brush is already that kind of that shape of a lot of the edges of my crystals, I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of get that in. One thing I also wanted to mention about the paints that I'm using today is that if you live in a very humid area, and I know this from experience because this is the third set of Yarka paints that I've had. These are actually the ones under the White Knight brand name. That if you are taking them someplace really humid, like I would go painting like by lakes and ponds in the summer, if you get a lot of humidity, they will kind of ooze out of their pans. So you want to make sure you keep them right side up. And if you just live in a really humid area, you might want to keep these at home. Or choose a different brand that's not so gooey. M. Graham does the same thing, and Sennelier can do the same thing to an extent. So, so I just wanted to let you know. So it's just really easy to get a nice, sharp, hard edge when you go in with a flat brush. Even though this is a fairly large brush for this size, it works really well. And it helps you from getting too fussy in there with the little details. So I can just go in and get a few of these like nice kind of sharp planes. And it's just really, really easy to do it that way. And I think I'll go do one pass with this flat brush, and I'll switch to something a little bit smaller. This brush is a little bit firmer than the mimics that we've been using, so you have to be careful you don't grab too much paint, especially with an artist quality paint, because it's a stiffer brush, bristle. It wants to grab more. So if you are using like student grade paints and you're having an issue with too much water, switching to a brush like this, which is just a golden Taklon, will really help with that sort of issue. I'm just getting in some bold lines here, and that's all. You can use it if you have an angled brush. I like this better than a straight flat because I can use the tip of it to get into those little nooks and crannies. Next, I'm going to go with a lemon yellow. Again, look at how much paint that grabbed. So it's very important that I go onto my palette and I take off the excess. But since I am using a different well for each color, I'll be able to pick that up with my round brush. None of that's going to go to waste, so I don't need to worry about that. And I want to thank the moderators for really stepping up today without Sarah here and answering questions. Well, I know they do that every week, but the beginning part of the tutorial, I can't even hardly look at the chat. So I really appreciate them hanging out and helping out. I'm going to switch over to my emerald green, also known as a phthalo green. This color is really pretty. Like if you mix it with a cadmium orange or a gamboge, it gives you some really beautiful earthy greens that are really realistic looking. I know it can seem like a really hard color to work with because it's so vibrant, but once you mix it down with like an orange or a yellow, you just get the most gorgeous olives and sap greens. It's really fantastic. I am going to mix this with some of the phthalo blue for this next little section here. Really just getting in chunky shapes. Don't fuss about it too much. It almost looks like a happy rainbow city. I always think of like the Wizard of Oz and the Emerald City when I'm painting crystals. I'm not going to fuss in too many details with this brush because this is just for me to quickly block in color. And last but not least, we're going to grab our violet, which is a pre-mixed color. I'll shift my palette down a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. That's a really strong transparent color, so you do want to make sure that you've worked it around so that you don't have too much on your brush. And my little crystal pieces are a little bit smaller down here, so I probably should have just waited for my round brush, but I wanted it to have that same feel. All right, so I have a certain amount of continuity and balance throughout the entire piece. Okay. Somebody has a question about shadows on the crystals. Yes, when you're looking at something like glass or crystal, you are going to see shadows because and highlights on different sides because of the refraction and reflection of light. So you are going to see, and they're transparent. It's going to be affected by things behind the crystal, other crystals growing on the other side. You're going to be seeing shadows of those. You're going to be seeing reflections of light bouncing off of the other faces of the crystals. That's why you're going to end up with so many different factors when you're painting crystals. That's why I advise to look up if you just want to do one color, look up your favorite color of crystal and go from there so that you can really have a good reference for your highlights and shadows. I'm going to make myself another mix. Actually, I'm going to start off with just that kind of a Van Dyke brown on its own. And I'm using that same number 8 round. I'm just going to start tapping in kind of the bottom outside crust of that rock. I'm going to do some tiny little taps in some areas, do some larger taps. This is one of our darker values, so I like to get my darker values in pretty close to the beginning of a painting, just so I kind of know what I'm gonna be in for. I want to get kind of another layer of mineral here. This is one of those times where I wish I knew something about geology, because there's probably really, you know, hard and fast rules about why things are the way they are. And now rinse my brush and grab a little bit of that violet and grab a little bit of the raw sienna right over here. Hopefully, yeah, I think you can see that. So I got a little violet, a little raw sienna. I like those colors. I'm going to drip some of those into that streak of, I don't know, sediment layer, whatever that is. Organic rocky goodness. And then I'm also going to take some of those 3 colors together. So I've got the violet, the Van Dyke brown, and the raw sienna. And you can use yellow ochre if that's what you have. Don't sweat it. I just like the raw sienna is a little more transparent. And I am actually going to kind of carve out some of these tiny little crystals by just broken line, adding a shadow around the tops of them. So where we had the salt and you have that really interesting chunky texture, I'm kind of accenting that. Put in little bits of shadow here and there. I like to have some nice yellow ochre in there because you get kind of that cloudy, warm coloring in there. And I'm going to actually grab the raw sienna. I think you can see that well. Whoops, there we go. Yep, raw sienna, lots of water here. And I'm actually going to do these little washes where I fill in some of the area with this very, very watery color. And then I'm going to drip in some of their corresponding colors. So what I mean by that is I'm getting this color, this like raw sienna in here. And now I'm going to just drip in. I'm not doing it all the way across just yet because I'm afraid it will dry on me. I'm dripping some of those reds. Dripping some of the oranges. Dripping some of the yellow. I can go through and spread it a little bit if I feel like it's too thick. Grab some of that green. kind of show with the rest of the raw sienna over there. And adding a little bit of that purple on the end. So it's not going to be really bright, but it's going to show that those colors are starting to build and form. Those are tiny little crystals. And I can pick up bits of that color and I can add it into the sedimentation underneath. And this is like a make-believe type of crystal we're painting here, so you don't have to worry about it being accurate to anything. Now, to give it a little more texture, you need to have a dry paper towel and just kind of blot some of it up, some of it back. All right, something else I want to do while we're still in our base layer here is a shadow underneath. And I'm going to start by putting water. I'm just doing like a horizontal line of water. I'm taking that sepia color. I'm going to add some of the violet to it. I'm going to add a little bit of my phthalo blue to it, so I get kind of a purpley gray. And I'm just going to go right underneath our crystal here and let that color just kind of float out and make a shadow on the table. And you can fade that shadow out just by going with clean water underneath. All right, so now I'm going to do another quick dry. So if you have any questions, put the word question in all caps, and I will see if I can help you out. I also wanted to let you know that if you feel like you need more beginner instruction, I do have a course on Teachable. It's linked in the video description. It has all of my basic tools and techniques for watercolor painting. It's a great way to get started if you don't have the time to sift through my 1,600 videos on YouTube. This is drying a lot quicker than the first layer. I don't see any new questions coming in. I can't really scroll back and look for old ones at the moment. So if you do have some, just pop them in right now and I will get to you. All right, Treasures of Many asks, would it be possible for you to make a printable link of this picture that we could print beforehand and then paint along with you, or do you already do this? I do this on some tutorials, not this one, because we sketched together at the beginning of this video, so you can rewind and sketch with me if you want to. All right, I think that's dry. So what I do is let my paper cool. If I'm not sure if it's dry or not, I just kind of touch it with the back of my hand. And if it feels room temperature, then it's dry. If it feels cool, then it's still a little damp. But we're going to be going on to the crystal areas now. So if the bottom part isn't completely dry, it's not a big idea. Joan says it looks like Jello City. It kind of does. It's like a bunch of jigglers in there, isn't it? All right, so I am going to grab some more of that red. So this layer, we want our paint kind of thick. We want it juicy enough so that it will come off our brush, but not so juicy that it's thin like that first wash we did. So this is kind of our whole milk consistency. That's how our paint should be. And I am going to go in and find little areas that I want to accent and darken. I could put extra layers on top of the layers I've already done. I can add some definition here and there. I can fill in little gaps. I can also put like kind of like little fissures. And you don't have to have straight flat faces on these either. You can have some you know, chipped pieces that kind of have more of a organic shape to them. You do want hard lines when you're on the edges, because that's what you would have. Ooh, that's a little watery there. If you get a bead of water on your brush, that's going to give you issues doing this technique. So you want to make sure you don't have any beads of water on the ferrule. You can sharpen up any edges that you have from your previous layers. If your paint feels too watery, you can just wipe your brush across the cake, the dry cake of color, and that will give you more concentrated color. It can feel like it takes a while to figure out where everything's going to go, where, like, what colors you're going to do everything. But I just kind of go by instinct and where do I feel like I need more of this color or that color. You also often see these like kind of ridges on the crystals, or these more concentrated color lines of color, maybe where things didn't grow uniformly for a while, and then you've got these weird areas. I'm going to move on to our yellow. I'm actually going to take my dirty brush here and just pick up some of that so I have a nice cross-pollination of color. I feel like this edge should be a little more orange because it would be reflecting. The orange is right there. So you have to take account of not only the color of your crystal, but what it's facing, because it can be reflecting that color. It'd be really cool if crystals did come like this. I'm actually going to dip into a little bit of green because I'm starting to get close to the green edge. And I like yellow as a color, but it's not as interesting if you're trying to do like a crystal effect with the yellow because it's such a light color. All right, we're going to move over to our emerald green. Need to get a little bit more of it. And you can darken up some of the previous layer if they weren't dark enough, like I just did there. As long as you keep some pretty like bold, hard strokes, it's going to end up looking all right. And we're moving over towards the blue, so kind of get ready to start mixing into some blue. I like to mix these two directly together because they're such a pretty mix. And I feel like right there, it's a little fuzzy, so I need to do something to make something a little bit sharper. So I think I'm going to give it a little bit of an edge of a face there. And just add that color to the gem in behind. We're going to sharpen things up too with every layer, so don't worry if it looks a little too undefined. Okay, so the phthalo blue on its own. Make sure you just try to keep everything sharp. We started off really light, so we'd have a lot of lights to work with, but we don't need to keep them all. We can, you can repaint areas. This is one of those easy ones where we have a gel pen that we can go in and get our highlights at the end, so we don't have to stress about anything in this picture. So now I'm going to work in the kind of this crystally area here. And you are going to add a little bit more water to your paint. And I'm going to start here with the purple and work my way back across. And just watch out for beads of water on the ferrule. I just had one there because they can have a nasty effect, nasty little surprise on you. That's a little darker than what I wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and just blot and dry my brush off and lift some of that. What you want is just to kind of impart a little bit more color. We are going to be using the white to accentuate the highlights, so we're going to have something under it for it to show up against. Working our way across with color. And then under there, there's like a little like vein of color, so I'm gonna kind of get that in with the different colors as we come across them. There's a big plane going by. You probably can hear that. Between that and the rain, I don't know if you can hear the rain or not, but it sounds lovely over here. Okay. Oops, I keep pushing this out of frame. I'm going to move my palette over a little bit to make sure that stays where it's supposed to be. Probably just tape it down. Okay, so now I'm going to go back in with my darkest kind of bottom of the rock crust color, which is our Van Dyke brown, and going to add some phthalo blue to it. I really want to cool that down. There we go. And I am going to just start just kind of tapping here. This is darker than anything I've painted so far, so I'm just going to kind of tap that along the bottom of this geode crystal thing. This is the edge of the rock, so it's rough and pucky. And by tapping, you get that texture. I'm also going to add little bits of that texture up higher in the rock, kind of at the bottom of that kind of crystal-y, non-defined area that we have in here. Just with the tip of the brush, and the brush is pretty dry. This is like it's very dry. It's I don't have a big puddle of it because I know I'm not going to need a bunch, but it would probably be the heavy cream consistency if I did have a big puddle of it. Maybe I want to add a little bit to the top of some of these too, just to kind of define it from the regular crystals, kind of like the crystals are coming out. It's almost like a cloud, really, that the crystal-y part's going to end up fairly reflective in light, so it's almost going to look like these crystals are coming out of a cloud. Reminds me of something that would be on Rainbow Bright, that cartoon I used to watch when I was a kid. Source of all their power or something. Okay, now I am going to move over to a smaller round brush so that I don't get too samey with my lines. And I am going to mix up some darker colors. So with that red, what I'm going to do is actually take the red and add a little bit of violet to it. I got my red. I'm just going to go ahead, go over there, grab some of that violet, and look at how much darker that makes that. It almost makes it like a wine color. So let's look at what that looks like. If I need it darker, I can add some phthalo to it. I don't know if I need it darker, but I need it thicker. Ooh, that's really dark. I don't think I need to add any blue to it. It's just when you get it to that whole the heavy cream consistency, it's going to be real dark. equal parts red and the violet. So look at that, it almost looks like black. It's just because it's so transparent. The color has just, and we have it on so thickly, it's just registering as black, even though it's like a really dark kind of plum color. And this is going to be probably our darkest shadows and refractions that we have. This is the same technique as like painting glass. You're going to get that same refraction, reflection type of thing. These lines are meant to be hard, not blended out, so keep that in mind too. And you may have to adjust and add more middle value stuff after you've gotten this dark in. Onto the orange, we're going to take the orange and add a little bit of the red to it, and then actually I'll add a little bit of that dark red mix to it, because that'll give us a nice dark. You need it just wet enough to float out, to flow off your brush. Ooh, if you can see that, I got a really big bead of water on my ferrule. I want to blot that off, because if that slides down in that really dark mix, it's going to cause problems. It can be tricky getting it dark enough and getting the paint wet enough. But you can always blot your brush off, and that will remove some of the water so you don't end up with more than you want. Whoops, I know. What I did there was I actually went outside the line, so I'm going to have to redefine the edge of that. So I'll probably just end up adding another facet onto that and filling it in with a lighter color. See, no mistakes. You can fix everything. And you can put some of the darker streaks right into your darker color. And you can put some of the darker streaks right on top of the lighter color too. I like to go right in next to that kind of crystal-y area, the undefined area here, and add some shadow, because that's going to help that stand out. Especially when we get into the stage of putting the gel pen in there. I'm going to have to come back in here and add more straight orange, because I have gotten a little confused in there. This area here is a little confused. So, but I want to let that dry first, because it's going to be easier to layer after that's dry. So now with our yellow, we're going to add a little bit of orange into the yellow to get our shadow color. Actually, let's grab a little bit of violet, because violet is the opposite, and I need to have a little bit more contrast there. And when you do have yellow gems, they do tend to have kind of like an amber look to them. They're not like super, super bright yellow generally. We'll move over to green. I just caught Joey's comment. He said he's so busy in chat that he can't paint. He's going to have to watch a replay. I love this color. It's such a true, vibrant, beautiful green. But so versatile if you like to do landscapes, because you could just mix it, like I mentioned, with your yellows and oranges and just get some really radiant colors. If you want, you can sneak over to the yellow again with this color and add a little bit here and there. The green hardly really needs anything because it's such a transparent, bold color that there's still a darker layer to go just by adding it full strength. I'll make that yellow go down a little bit further next door as well. Ooh, and they have a cat at the back door that wants to come in. I'm just going to open the back door and let my cat in really quick. Come on in. All right, Frida's in the house. And we're going to skip over to the blue. And just do the same thing. Oops, I got a drop of water on my paper. And again, the blue is really strong so that if you add that in on its own, it does seem to be bold enough just to be added in straight. And I'm actually going to add violet to that blue for the violet shadows. Oops, right there. And bring it right down to that undefined area so we can have so we can know where that is so that we can define it in a little bit. Contrast is really important. We need that contrast of the color next to this murky area so when we put our lights in, it will stand out. Okay, so I'm going to dry this. It'll only take me a minute. So if you do have a question, you can go ahead and ask me while I am drying. And we will start our gel pen highlighting time. And we can go back in with watercolor after that, but it will help us really decide what else we need to do. Grace says I should spatter for rainbow sprinkles. That's something, maybe I will. I don't know. Aaron asks if I practice these paintings before I go live. Yes, this was my practice sketch here. And can you see that right there? And then earlier this week, I did one with just one color right there. So believe it or not, I actually do practice a bit. Even though it may look like a hot mess, I actually do practice first. Question, have you had the opportunity to try the Stonehenge Legion watercolor paper? Yes. Yeah, I like it. I don't think it's any better than like Arches or the stuff I normally use, but it's definitely good. What kind of watercolor tubes would you suggest and what brand of paper as well? I have a whole playlist of reviews and recommendations. There's so many good ones. Most major brands, if you're buying an artist quality, is going to be good. Which blue and green were you using? I didn't hear. So I have phthalo blue and a phthalo green. It might be called emerald depending on what brand you're using. Alexandra asks, is there any way to reshape a brush? I have a Kolinsky I got as a gift, but it keeps fraying. Yes, if you soap it with like dish soap and bring it to a point and let it dry that way, when you wash it out the next day, it should be fine. Okay, and the last question I have time for now, does using iridescent watercolor paint qualify for a pure watercolor painting? It totally depends on what the where you're trying to show the artwork. It's very subjective. Different watercolor societies have different different codes that go by. Oh, one more question. Do you stretch your paper? I typically do not unless I'm working larger and I intend to work on that painting for a long time. So I'm going to go in and add some bright highlights with this white gel pen. And it's really fun. I do enjoy using a white gel pen. I know it does kind of take the true watercolor nature away, but you know what? This is a just for fun project, so I am doing it. So I like to put this, if I'm going to do like a big squiggle, I like to do it on a lighter face of one of these parts of the crystal. But if I'm just going to do a little slice, I like to do it on a darker side because that just shows you it's shiny. It's a great way to get the definition and those sharp glistens. You can always add more, so you might want to go a little conservative to begin with, and then you can be bolder after. A great place to put the highlights is on edges, like where you have like two faces of the crystal coming together, or you might have one kind of butting up against another. Or if you have a really weird, like kind of nondescript area like I do here, I'm going to try to go ahead and get this a little bit more defined because it's really kind of sloppy. And it's almost like being able to draw again. So you did your first drawing and maybe it was good, but then you lost some elements. So this gives you that opportunity to redraw and redefine an area. If you're nervous, do it on the lighter areas and then it won't show up so much. And I generally keep my highlights more to the top just because that's what's going to be reflecting the most light generally. This is a Uniball Signo gel pen. It's my favorite white gel pen. It's by the Mitsubishi Mitsubishi Pencil Company. But just look for Uniball Signo, and it is a broad tip. But if you have a white gel pen that works, then wonderful. I've just had so many bummers that once I found these, I was just like, I'm not even going to chance another pen. I get so tired of them running dry on me. The cool thing about this, you can actually wash over it with watercolor. And sometimes it will resist if it's super, super dry. You can actually lift some of it up while it's still wet. So you do want to make sure it dries good if you want to glaze over it. But it's a very fun, versatile product to have in your sketching bag. This reminds me of Superman's Fortress of Solitude for some reason. Like crystals all over the place. Maybe this is kryptonite and not emeralds. So you can have highlights wherever because this is glass. Glass doesn't play by the same rules as normal still life stuff. But I just love how it really defines the piece when you start to get those sharp highlights. All right, so the undefined area is going to have some crunchy, crystally areas. So what I want to do here is just kind of draw them in, right, basically with the white. So I'm just kind of using scribbly lines like that, just kind of making scribbly lines, basically. You could draw like kind of rough, kind of chunky, rocky shapes if you want to. I try to keep it as vague as possible because I'm not really working from a reference photo, so I've looked at a lot of photos over the last couple of days, but I'm kind of making it up. So I don't want to commit to anything too fully because I'm not 100% sure how, like, every different kind of gem would have this at that layer in it. This is something that this is a very illustrative piece. It's kind of like if you're when I'm illustrating a book, a lot of times I have to kind of make up stuff going by what the author has written, and this would definitely be, this is kind of like how I work there. It's kind of like, well, I try to find something that's fairly realistic, and then I just kind of wing it after that. And then if you want, you can add little bits of that kind of in these layers of sediment. And remember, if something's too bold, we can go over it. So don't feel like you're, you know, doing anything to ruin it at this stage. You're not. And if you don't have a gel pen, you could use like a white acrylic paint. Just make sure it's really dry before you go on. Or you could use like a gesso, or Dr. Peach Martin makes a product called Bleed Proof White. Daniel Smith makes Absorbent Ground, which I use a lot illustrating because it's like an eraser. Basically, almost like you're painting a layer of paper on top of an error, which I really, it's not what that's designed for, but it's what I use it for mostly. So I'm going to zap this with my heat tool. If we have any questions at this stage of the game, go ahead and pop them in the chat. Because gel pen does take a little while to dry. I think it has kind of like an oily base to it. Rachel asks, if I wanted to do this like you did with the ombre from your Instagram post, how would I go about that? You would do the exact same thing. I used there were my colors right there. I used like a quinacridone rose, dioxazine violet, ultramarine blue, Van Dyke brown, and yellow ochre or burnt sienna. I think I actually used yellow ochre on this one. The same idea, same, whoops, that's not even where you can see it. Same steps, same idea. Look at the picture from Instagram if you want to like save it on your computer or just open it up on your phone or whatever, and just paint right along that way. You could also look for reference photos of amethysts on Google, and I have that to go by as well. I think there were some really good amethyst reference photos on Pixabay too, and that's a free commercial use photo website if you want to check that out. And Ashton asks, I'm switching from watercolor pencils to watercolor paints and having a rough time with backgrounds. How do you decide what to do first, object or background? If I know I'm going to have a background, I generally do background first. If I'm not sure, or if I make a mistake and I get kind of schmutz in my background, then I can paint it afterwards, but I like to do it first. Maria asks, do you use any sketchbooks for your watercolor paintings? I do, actually. I have a Cachet sketchbook with aquafine paper. That's the one I use the most. I also have a Canton Montville sketchbook. It doesn't really matter. Just use whatever you have. Use whatever you like. Okay, so I was thinking that my orange yellow area was a little confused. So I want to kind of add just some bolder bands of color in a couple spots here because I felt like it got a little too convoluted and I lost the kind of crystally effect. So that's what I just did right there on that orange. Got a little out of control there, had to fluff that up. There we go. And maybe a little bit with my yellow. Now I'll just go over that highlight just to show you. You can still see the highlight if I paint over it, but it does allow you to glaze on top, which I think is kind of strange because gel pens are kind of oily, but whatever it is, it must absorb into the paper enough that you can still go over and glaze onto it a little bit, but it does keep that brighter layer underneath, which is nice. So I'm just kind of, there's a couple areas where I felt like I needed to define them a little bit more. So that's all I'm doing right here. So just refining. I'm using a small brush so I don't adjust anything too much. And I'm not using a really thick paint. I'm using it fairly watery so that I don't, so I just kind of unify some areas because that's what I was feeling I needed. I just got a bunch of contrast with the gel pen. I was feeling like I needed more unity. Okay, so now I'm again going to go in with my pure colors. And in the area where we put the highlights with the scribbly lines, I'm just putting little kind of swipes of color. And what I'm basically doing here is to try to show that crystals are starting to form in this kind of crusty, crunchy bit. They kind of remind me of like the borax crystals. If you ever did that as a kid, where you do the string in borax and you put it in water and it grows crystals, that's what this kind of is. It's kind of like rock candy type texture. And I'm just kind of skipping along and grabbing the next color as I go across. I will do questions and answers at the end. When I'm doing the show by myself, that just lets me focus on the painting while I'm working on it. And that way, folks that are watching the replay that might not, you know, they're not watching live, so they might not care about the questions. They can either avoid them or they can stick around and watch if they are interested. So I just feel like it makes a good experience for playback when I don't have somebody, you know, asking me the questions when it's relevant to me or to everybody. I'm adding a little bit of that raw sienna in some places. I like to add a little bit of that into that crusty area as well, to kind of neutralize it a bit because it's not as bright. And then I'm going to go back in with the Van Dyke brown. I think I might add a little orange to that because it's a really cold brown. It might be sepia. Like I said, the names are a little different. I'm adding a little of that orange to it just to make it a little bit more like a burnt sienna. I'll warm it up a little bit, and I'm adding that into this kind of crusty outside layer. All right, to add a little bit of shadow and kind of set the crystals back from this kind of layer here, I am just going to grab some of the mud on my palette, basically. Oh, that's a good color. So I've got probably some violet, some red, some of that brown, and a little bit of that yellow in there. It's just giving me kind of a sludgy color. Add a little blue to it. There, kind of like a neutral sludgy color. And I am just going to add it above the kind of borax crystal crunchy bits. And the fun thing about painting something from your imagination is that it really teaches you what you've paid attention to. Because, you know, if you can make stuff up from your mind, you're not really making anything up. You're just able to recall the observations that you've done in the past. So not only will this show you what you've learned and what you know, but the next time you're looking at something interesting that you might want to paint, you're going to remember that. You're going to be like, oh, I'm going to really pay attention to the way the light hits that picture, or you're really going to pay attention to, you know, the way the sun looks over the field, or the way the sunset looks, you know, when you're driving in your car, which drives my husband crazy because I often notice a lot of things while I'm driving in the car. That's why he usually drives. But you'll notice you look at things a lot differently after you've tried painting from your imagination. Now this nice neutral color is such a lovely gray that I'm finding I could actually go in and add some more deep shadows and crisp lines any place I feel like I have gotten a little too sloppy. So this gray is great for that. It's that same gray. It's right here on my palette. If you can see it, it's just almost like a neutral tint. It has a little bit of everything in it. You know, it's got a little bit of this and that from our palette. It's all colors we've used, so we're not, I mean, we use a lot of colors in this, a lot more than we usually do, but we're integrating them continuously, so so it doesn't look out of place. But that's also one of the things that makes it look a little more illustrative. I know when I am illustrating, I don't limit myself to as many colors, because in the printing process, it's going to be printing from, you know, 3 inks or 6 inks or whatever. It's going to be reduced. And I don't have to worry about it so much on my end because I know it'll be reduced eventually. So that is probably a little bit dark. I'm going to grab some of that yellow ochre when I'm going in, or raw sienna rather, when I'm going into the yellows, just because it is a little too strong for the yellow crystals. Go light on the yellow ones. They're very easy to mess up because you don't have a lot of contrast in there to work with. And I like to start a lot of those streaks kind of, I'll start it on the shadowiest bit, the darkest bit, and then I'll drag it up a lot of times, especially down here near the edge. I have a urge to watch Wizard of Oz. And I might grab in like more of the red shadow color that I already had on my palette, or at least dip into it a little bit so I get the nice vibrant dark. If you do end up making a line kind of smushy, just get some wetter paint and redefine it. Okay, well, I think that is just about how I want it. I could add more in the shadow underneath, but I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. I'm going to look at questions right now, so if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. For those of you that are watching the replay that don't care about the questions, I do thank you for hanging out, and you can find everything I used linked in the video description. All right, Karen Lindsay asks, how do we see or receive notifications that you're going live? There's a little bell icon. If you subscribe to my channel and you click the little bell next to it, it will notify you of upcoming live streams. Or if you follow me on my blog is the best place. Link is in the description, or on Facebook or Instagram. You'll get a notification before I go live because I always post out there too. Michael Beckett asks, are all gel pens by definition oil-based, or does it depend on the brand? You know, I'm really not sure. I do think most of them do have kind of an oily component to them. Aaron S says, looks great, Lindsay. If you practice, oh shoot, the one by too quick. Oh, Grace says the sound is crackling. Hopefully that fixes. I don't know what to do about it at this stage of the game. Oh no, we got a sound problem. I'm going to unplug my mic and replug it in. Hopefully that works. Okay, does it sound better now, guys? Hopefully, does it sound any better? If you could let me know in the comments, that would be really great. If not, then I guess I will sign off. Nobody else is saying the sound is bad, so, oh, no, still sound issues. Shoot. Well, since we're having sound issues, I'm just going to try plugging here. Okay, one last check of sound. If the sound is working, great. If not, then I am going to sign off. Okay, the sound is still bad. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up before you go. I'm just going to wave bye since the sound is bad. Until next time, happy crafting.